Welcome to the Profitable Farmer Podcast, where it's all about increasing the profitability of your farm by working smarter, not harder.
G'day, and once again, welcome to Profitable Farmer. From wherever you are dialing in from around Australia, for many of you, it's going to be locked in a cabin of either a chaser bin or a header or a truck of some description. And I'm hoping that harvest is really positive for you. The reports I get from our community is that that's the case in many regions. Often over harvest, we can get cabin fever sitting in those cabins and probably not necessarily have a broader national or global perspective. And so it's with that in mind that I'm delighted to introduce Brett Stevenson to you today. Brett is the founder and managing director of Market Check, which was a company that was founded in 1996 by Brett and now is regarded quite clearly as Australia's most highly respected and widely used independent grain marketing program for farming families across Australia. So Brett, welcome. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Jeremy. Very glad to come on board.
So Brett, getting straight into this, if I could, we're in the throes of what seems to be quite a positive harvest for many. Would you mind just giving us your assessment of what you and your team are seeing across Australia by way of this grain harvest and how it's coming in?
Yeah, well, Jeremy, it's not. Look, the probably the highlight of this year's harvest is the fact that a lot of areas of New South Wales and northern, central, southern New South Wales, which have been in the grip of drought for 3 years, are having an absolutely sensational harvest so far by yield and also by price, even though it's not a high price, but price to yield ratio is very, very good. So that's a real highlight. Victoria is a sort of above average, South Australia sort of average, and some areas below average, and West Australia is very mixed. So, it's probably it's a very good harvest, nearly 30 million tonnes of wheat across Australia. But as I say, the highlight is for a lot of those growers who have had a very poor time for the last 3 years getting a cracker harvest this year.
Yeah, which is absolutely wonderful to see. So just going into that in a little bit more detail, Brett, what you're seeing out of Victoria is a really positive outcome this year?
Victoria will be a positive outcome because there's a lot of areas are getting average to above average crops this year in Victoria. The prices are nothing like the drought prices which we've had in the last few years. So for a lot of southern Victoria areas in the last few years, due to the drought, they've had quite good yields and they've had absolutely exceptional prices. So one man's fish is another man's poison. They're poison, as they say, but the New South Wales has been struggling with no crops at all, and that's benefited a lot of guys in Victoria, particularly southern Victoria and South Australia. So Victoria, yes, they'll have another good year, but obviously, as I say, the highlights in New South Wales.
Absolutely. And what about into South Australia? You mentioned that they're perhaps not probably having as good a season as the more eastern states. So what about South Australia and then Western Australia?
Yeah, well, South Australia, yes, it's very mixed. There's still some good areas, particularly over on the eastern side, on the peninsulas and that sort of thing, pretty mixed cropping scenario. The prices are, they're, as I say, they're sort of average. Barley price is not disastrously low like it was in 2016, but it's still pretty low. So it's, it's, as I say, average, below average from an income, from a gross margin point of view in South Australia. In Western Australia, again, mixed. The south, there's some good areas, Esperance. But in the northern zones, a lot of crops got cut short. As I say, without going into the, all the bits and pieces of who's got it and who hasn't. In Western Australia, the pricing, again, they're on export the same as the East Coast. So they're just sort of average prices for them.
Thank you, Brett. And your assessment is a 30 million tonne annual or domestic crop?
Yeah, this year for wheat, just using wheat as a bit of a benchmark, we're thinking around that 29, 30 million. It'll be interesting to see how it sort of all pans out, forecast to forecast, but we'll have to count the tons in the bin at the end of the day. But I think it should be, I think it might be a smidge higher than that, but I reckon around about that. And of course, 2016, we had 34.5 million to give people a bit of a benchmark of comparison.
Great, thank you. Now, I understand Market Check delivers training and support to over 4,000 businesses annually, but you've got over 1,000 members across Australia. Would you mind just giving us a bit of background on Market Check, the business, and your team, Brett?
Yeah, well, a little bit of history. I started Market Check actually in 1990, late 94, so 1995, and the principle has been to educate farmers on grain marketing principles and that sort of thing in terms of just managing risk and as well as selling the grain. The reason for that beginnings was at that time there was an acknowledgement that the deregulation was on the way of the national single desk, and so I was out there trying to prepare growers for that. It didn't happen for a much longer period than I thought, so it didn't happen until 2008, in fact. So now we've gone from purely sort of an education situation, which was back where we started, that's where our roots were, to now providing education, but we also provide consultancy support. We provide an agency arrangement where we act for growers on their behalf in the market. And we also provide what we call managed programs where we action particular strategies on behalf of our growers as well. So, and we have some growers who are just members who like to receive the support of information and strategy about what to do. We have other growers who just like to put some grain into our managed programs. Some who like to use us as their agents, and others who like to use us for the whole shooting match. We provide advisory services, we market their grain, we balance out their risk for them. It's a much more intensive relationship we have with those growers. So a bit of across the board, but I sort of see that we offer pretty much what most, you can't generalize with growers. Growers are all different, and some growers want something and others want others. And we like to think we probably provide a pretty broad spectrum to satisfy those needs.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, I know that many of our clients value and rely on the support and the advice that your team provide. I can think of at least 5 from a standing start, and they all speak very highly of you. So for those of you that haven't yet met or got to know the Market Check business, I highly recommend that you jump onto their website, check them out, and reach out if support in this space is something that you're looking for.
Thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Brett. So, Brett, coming back to prices, what was playing out, and again, perhaps for wheat and maybe canola or the pulses, over sort of the few months leading up to harvest, and what have you seen in recent weeks?
Well, there's sort of the 3 B's, if you like. Let's talk about canola, barley, and wheat. It's been an interesting year because we've had COVID and all the impacts that that's had on in these markets. We've had the China barley aspect, and more recently, sort of innuendo that it's going to be that they're trying to block us in wheat. But anyway, the long and the short of it is that, and starting with canola, is the world is relatively short of oilseeds. China, interestingly, while trying to sort of push their trade situation, are desperately short of soybean and soybean meal, and certainly the oils as well. So even though you're sort of feeling like there's this negative overtone from the way the world is with COVID, etc., the oil market is quite strong. Canola is up there around about the $600 a tonne mark, and has been there for some time. So that's very rewarding for the growers who've got canola in this year. And then we'll go from the good, the bad, the ugly. We'll drop down to barley. Barley, very different story because we were dropped in the soup there a few years ago by China pulling out and there being a major buyer. So we've had to, the grains had to find a new home, which is, the second biggest buyer in the world is Saudi Arabia, and now we've gone from those numbers back to numbers which are reaching Saudi now. So 215, 220s delivered port for barley. We're the cheapest barley going around, especially in Southeast Asia. But the thing is, the world is again relatively short of feed grains. Nothing like the oversupply that was there in 2016, and so we're not at the $100 a tonne mark for barley. So for those that have got quite good crops of barley, it's not a disastrous experience of being involved in barley. And then moving just quickly to wheat. Wheat has had a sort of roller coaster year because we had all that front end demand earlier in the year as a result of the outbreak of COVID and people building up stocks in their houses of flour and this sort of thing, not just in Australia but globally. We saw a rally where the Australian dollar equivalent of the American price got up to $340, $350 a tonne, and then we've weakened off. We're now at about sort of $295 odd a tonne equivalent. And China, as I say, reverberations about China's buying capacity of wheat from Australia, but they're only a small piece of the buying pattern of Australian product. And so, we've not seen a real damaging aspect to the price. But the prices are relatively low to where they were previously in the year. But they're still not disastrously low. The main consequence is that our price relative to the world is very cheap. We're virtually pricing into markets from Southeast Asia all the way to the Middle East. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a general wrap-up of where we are across the three major grains that people are growing.
Thanks, Brett. What's your take on China and how that might unfold for us?
Well, it's quite interesting. Let me sort of start by this. Obviously, there from a trade perspective, we have people that we retain to give us information on what's happening with trade and information flows. They're based in China, and so we get a lot of information about what's going on at that level. And simply as this, they're really just trying to, I guess, hurt us from a trade perspective. So they're picking out commodities which they can find from other sources, and are providing blockages for us, if you like, and difficulties for us in those commodities. And so barley was an easy one because there's other sources of barley around the world. Wine, things like this, lobster, but when it comes to something like wheat, there's really not much damage to be done. They only buy 10, maybe 15% tops of our crop. So there's not a lot of hurt factor there, if you like. So that's been the general sort of play that's been going on. But quite interestingly, just in the last 24 hours, Jeremy, and maybe to do with the new Biden administration coming in, but there's been quite a shift between, and this is sort of more macro, between the UK, Japan, and Europe, taking, at this stage only verbal, but taking a position to say that China is unnecessarily focusing on Australia and what's this all about. So, I don't know. It will be interesting to see how it plays out, but we might see some softening. I'm hoping, certainly, that we might see some softening from China. I know they've wanted to sort of try and wield the stick a bit on Australia in the last 6 months, but it's now being picked up by a lot of the other world trading nations, and I think we might have some friends that are going to help us out soon here.
Positive signs, perhaps, hopefully.
I hope so. I think that certainly the new administration in America will act very differently to the past one, which I think is quite logical for everybody.
I think that's something we can almost hang our hat on. I'm not sure we could have a repeat of the same, could we?
No, I don't think we'll ever see that again, and probably, depending on where you sit, maybe thankfully, but certainly from a trade perspective to Australia, we'd prefer to see a more moderate stance on China than what's been the case in the last few years.
What about more globally? What are you seeing by way of production? What has happened in Europe and the Asias and the Americas over this season?
Yeah, well, without sort of going, because the world is a very big place, Jeremy, there's a lot of crop out there, but probably to focus on the main one, the main one has been the fact that we're sitting in La Nina, and a lot of growers, I'm hoping, are looking, out there, at the crop this morning, probably on their headers or not headers, or if they're finished looking at their storage reports. But the thing is, we're in a very good season, La Nina style season, and that's wetter than average for us. And you'll notice probably those who watched the news last night, the fire risk is one thing, but we're worried about floods. Conversely, in the northern hemisphere, that is drier than normal, for them. And so the crops that were planted and going into the winter snow cover in the Black Sea and North America received really insufficient rain to germinate properly before going under snow. A lot of them are not under snow yet, so there's been a little bit of rain to help, but that's created a bit of an issue in a world that's, from a supply point of view, is reasonably well balanced. There's surplus stocks in some areas, particularly in China, but we've got quite a tight world for wheat, and so that's what supported the prices to get them to where they are today, and that's why in a high production year we've actually got quite a reasonable price, not like the disastrous prices we had in 2016. But the main focus is those big production areas of North America and the Black Sea that are going into winter with insufficient rain underneath the crops.
So does that bode well for prices into the near term?
Well, where it will play a role is next year in terms of how those crops come out of the snow cover, and just whether they had enough germination to protect them. So we're in for some volatility, Jeremy, I might say. Like with those, Black Sea is the biggest wheat production zone in the world now, and with America, not far behind, and both of them have got a lot of uncertainty over them. So I think we're in for a fair bit of volatility.
Thank you, Brett. It's really interesting to get your perspective on this. Perhaps coming back to Australia, what about quality? It seems to me, as I speak to our clients and drive around, that certainly in this region, that quality seems really positive. What's happening by way of grain quality this year, and perhaps price differential between the grades?
Yeah, well, it's been quite interesting. Yes, you're right. The quality so far from northern and central New South Wales, and even now appearing as we're moving, through southern New South Wales, has been exceptional. Like we've got growers in the Walgett area, which is APH sort of 13, 14, 15% protein, virtually all for a big percentage of their crop. I won't say that that's everybody, but it's been very high quality crop. So big yields, high quality, sounds fantastic, but unfortunately, domestically, there was an oversupply of that quality, and also an undersupply of APW, and so the grade, which is used a lot in biscuit making and other things like that, was undersupplied. So it moved up, and the high protein better grades moved down, and so there's only a very small premium over APW for the higher protein grades, which for a lot of growers might seem, gee, finally got a brilliant crop, great quality, and I'm not getting rewarded for it. And that's, in a certain sense, sort of true, but it's mostly got to do with the short supply of the median grades, like APW, which is artificially making them more expensive than normal because of the low supply. But once you move away from that down to the feed grades, which are being dragged down by barley, of course, you're $70 or $80 away. So, and fortunately, so far we've had very little of that. Some areas of Liverpool Plains have been caught up with it, but mostly, Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, the quality situation has been quite strong and meant that we're more in a human consumption market than we are in a feed market.
Thanks, Brett. So what's your take on what impact a positive year like this might have on our farming families?
Well, I certainly think, and I know I come from Dubbo, so I guess I've got a strong, empathy for what's been going on in the central west and north the last 3 years. In New South Wales, at least, it's going to be a great burst of enthusiasm, burst of money, if you like, back into bank accounts, and it's going to lift a lot of those towns and things that have been very run down. I mean, I'll give you one sample. We've got a grower client of ours that's based at Collie, just north of Dubbo, and I'm quite friendly with the father. And anyway, in his career, he's my age. I'm 60, just by the way. In his career, they've not had 1 year where they've dropped a crop, in sense of having average or below average, but they've virtually had no crop for 3 years. I mean, it's been nothing short of extraordinary, but they're getting a bin buster this year. So that's going to be a huge help for the balance sheets of not only the farmers, but also a huge help for the local communities in all those areas. So, and I think otherwise in Victoria, and I don't want to generalise too much because there's lots of different, northern and south and eastern Victoria, but generally they're travelling quite well. So this will be good in that it's a good crop. Western Australia, I'll just quickly go. South Australia, not too bad because, as I say, the drought prices have been helping them the last few years. And Western Australia, I think it's pretty tough because they had a bad harvest last year. And for those regions that have not got a very good crop this year, it's a bit of a tough year. So it's as normal, it's a big paddock, Australia, and so we've got some haves and have-nots.
Thanks, Brett. So for those out there in the midst of harvest, make sure you enjoy this one. I do hope that it's positive for you and that your recovery from what has been a tough year for many is as strong as it can be. So thanks for that, Brett. It's great to get your sort of national and even global overview.
Thanks, Jeremy. Really appreciate you including me on your podcast. So I hope that, if I can just, I know a lot of members will be within your group. So a bit of a shout out to say, hope you're all travelling well and looking forward to talking to you soon.
Perfect, Brett. Now, I've got a couple more questions. I'm not going to let you go yet, if that's okay.
Oh, gee, I thought you were wrapping up. Sorry. Okay, go ahead, Jeremy. Sorry about that.
So, no, it's completely fine. If you reflect back on, I guess, your 25-ish years in business or more with Market Check, I'm not very good at maths, Brett. Would you mind describing how the team has grown? Like, how many people do you employ now, and to what degree are you actively involved in the leadership? And would you mind sharing the structure that Market Check operates to?
Yeah, well, we as you mentioned before, we started back in the mid '90s. I had 10 years in banking prior to that. It's the 20. Well, what are we at? 95. It must be 25th year of operation of Market Check. As I said before, we're across the board in a lot of different service structures to our broadacre growers. We ebb and flow with the seasons because we rely on tons for our business to operate. So it's to be brutal about it, the last 3 years have been very tough for us. And so we had 23 odd people on staff up until January this year, and we just couldn't continue, so we had to retrench a number. We're back down to 14 staff now as a result of that, but we've been able to survive. And sadly, a lot of other competitors of ours have not survived. And I say sadly because as an industry, I'd like to see the industry continue to develop, but the drought has sort of wreaked havoc, unfortunately, on a lot of other consultants and providers in this space. Because of COVID, we were in an office, but now we're working very disparately. We've got a lot of our advisory staff working regionally, as well as from the city, and we're very fortunate in that we've invested heavily over the years in communication structures. So most of our business runs from the cloud. Our phone system, all our client management system, all operates from the cloud. So it was very easy for us to adapt to the post-COVID environment. And so we're in a new part to our journey. In that, we're not in an office now. We have an office, but there's very rarely people there, and we're communicating from this, this platform of advisors that are based all over the place, South Australia, all over New South Wales, Victoria, and it's working very, very well, I must say, Jeremy. So we're not in a hurry to try and pull everybody back into the office again, but and we're wanting to get back onto a growth path again. So we're a national provider, which is of which we're the only one in Australia to be in that situation. And so, given the size of the crop and the responsibility, we'd like to get the business back growing again. We've grown quite a lot in the last 25 years, but we'd like to get back onto a path where we can look after more growers.
No doubt some tough decisions, Brett, recently as a result of those last few dry seasons. As you reflect back on your 25-year journey with Market Check and going from a small team to what has been and will become again a significant team, what are you most proud of as managing director to that company?
Well, I'm probably most proud of the staff, really. I'm very proud of what they've been able to achieve. We've had, a lot of challenging times. The drought, the 02 drought, you call it whatever you like, 07, 08, and then the 17-20 drought. The people working at Market Check have been extremely resilient. The second part to it I'm probably most proud of is our clients. We have some tremendous clients who have been growing their businesses over this last 25 years. I have some terrific family farming businesses that I'm very proud to be associated with. And I think for us, it's been a bit of a survival sometimes. But we've been able to adapt as the market has. We've gone through deregulation, and I believe very strongly that we've been able to provide the best practice possible services for our growers that have been able, given the circumstances they've been confronted with. So, it's been an interesting time because I've come from all those regulated market times back in the 90s to now being totally deregulated. It's been a very interesting passage of history for the grain industry in Australia, and I look forward to one day maybe writing a bit of a book or something about it, because it has been extraordinary watching it all unfold and running a business and a profitable business over that period. So, but by the same token, I'm very excited about what we're going to be able to do over the coming 25 years.
I think the writing of that book should be absolutely up the list, Brett. We know how volatile the commodity markets can be, and to have stuck with and been as resilient as your company has to arrive into its 25th year as the number one national independent grain marketing business for Australia. It's a significant story that probably goes unnoticed a lot of the time.
Thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate that.
So speaking of your story and writing a book, I was actually speaking to your fellow director and some friends of mine who shared with me a story of 2010 for you, Brett, I think, when you had an accident that meant that you then became a quadriplegic and no doubt had to sort of endure a significant recovery and a change in your life. Would you mind speaking to that and perhaps sharing that story and how you've managed to navigate success in business, family and life given that challenge?
Yeah, well, I would say, and I guess why I'm saying I'm very proud of my staff is because, yes, in January 2010, whilst on holidays, I dived into the ocean at a beach and I hit a submerged rock and broke my neck, which I'm very lucky. You can look at these things as lucky or as unlucky, but I was extremely lucky to have survived that accident, actually. And yes, it's provided an extraordinary challenge. I thought it was challenging enough to be in the grain industry, but to be in the grain industry and also and spend almost a year in hospital was something else. So, yeah, there's been a number of adaptations. I've had to adapt myself personally to living my life in a different way without the capacities I had before. And the business has had to rely on not having me available each day, and they've Tom Bassnett in particular, but the rest of the team have been extraordinary. It's amazing what people can do and achieve when they're placed in such an extraordinary situation. I think sometimes that's underestimated what people are capable of when they're placed in these situations. So we've had to change things a bit at a personal level, at a business level. The interesting thing is, Jeremy, is that I think one of the reasons why we've been as resilient and successful as we've been has been because of that accident. So prior to my accident, I was very much involved in the business. I had a bank, I had a list of clients that I was looking after personally. Naturally, with becoming a quadriplegic, I couldn't do that anymore. I just couldn't manage it. So I've been able to spend more time on the business than in the business. I've been able to look from a bit more of a helicopter of what the business is, how we're running it, how we're managing it, and what we're doing. And that's meant I've been able to re-engineer things a bit to ensure survival through things like a 3-year drought, which we've never seen before. And even though we had hoped we could keep our full contingency of staff, we just couldn't in the end. But nonetheless, we're still here to continue. And so it's an interesting perspective looking at me, the way the business operates, the success of the business, and the situation I was placed in, and some of the positives from that. So, but I won't ever say it's been easy. It's been pretty tough. But I'm very, in the scheme of things, I'm a lucky person. I've got a great family. I've got a great group of people I work with, and I love working with our client base. So, I had a lot going for me. So it's been able to keep me in pretty good spirits.
I'm really grateful for you sharing so much of that story, Brett, and it always amazes me to hear someone who's been through that, just the mindset and the silver lining that you hold on to and get to really enjoy. So thank you for that. You mentioned working on the business and not in. We kind of exist to help farming families learn true business management and business leadership skills. And we actually sort of very much work with our coaches to hold them accountable to be working on their farm businesses as families and not in them. What do you see when you sort of look across your client base? Do you see them stuck as technicians in their business and doing the work of their business, or do you see farmers actually giving enough time, in your opinion, to the CEO type functions that are just so important in any business?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, Jeremy. I mean, you can't generalize, because some farmers are able to grow and run their businesses very effectively by putting in enormous amounts of effort just purely into all the technical side of their business themselves, as the peer, if you like, of their business. But always the issue is the risk, by doing that, and if something happens or something like that, and then there's a huge gap left in the business. I guess I've always been a very consensus-driven manager, so it's meant everybody's been involved in decisions. And so when my accident happened, it wasn't such a big deal for them to run the business without me there. But I agree with what you're saying. The businesses that really tick and really run well are those ones where the farmer is sharing their routine and that sort of thing, to make sure that they're very much working on the business, even though they enjoy working in the business. So, and that's why, I will, if I go to anything that's got to do with information or best practice, and probably your membership as well, I'll often see a lot of Market Check members, because we tend to attract those people who do want to, work, not just, work very hard, just trying to do the business, but they also want to make sure it's run well, make sure they've got good planning in place, good strategy in place, and they're when I'm talking about the real success stories within our group, there's always an element of that, it's something I know, from my own history of my father and family farming business. It's sometimes hard to do that, because you feel guilty. You feel like you should be out there with the team working alongside them. There's very much a culture of that in agriculture in Australia. But if you really want to make things tick, you've got to probably get back to the office and include yourself in things like what you're doing, and others, to make sure you're getting lots of information and developing good strategy and working on how the business is moving forward and what's going on from a more longer term point of view.
Such a great comment, Brett. Thank you. I'm going to say that we probably should wrap up. I could talk to you for a lot longer, but I just want to sincerely thank you for your time at short notice, and to get that national perspective and that global overview, and then just to hear your story of business leadership and the resilience that, again, you've shown to see Market Check arrive to where it is. So for those of you who are interested, please head to the Market Check website and check out all that they're up to. Absolutely respect this company as the number one independent grain marketing company for Australian farmers. So thank you, Brett, again for your time. I really do appreciate it, and I look forward to checking in again shortly.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks very much for including me. I've enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you very much. Take care, guys, and bye for now.